welcome to ESL-Easy English, the podcast that helps you understand and speak English more confidently. I'm your host, James, and today we have a very special guest with us, Alison. Alison, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today, we're going to talk about something that can be a little tricky for English learners, especially those whose first language has a different sentence structure. We're going to explore the differences between English and German sentence structure. Alison, you've taught English for many years, and you've worked with many German speakers. What are some of the common challenges they face with English sentence structure?
That's a great question, James. One of the biggest differences, and therefore a common challenge, is word order, particularly with verbs. In English, we tend to have a very fixed subject-verb-object order. For example, I eat apples. Subject I, verb eat, object apples. It's quite straightforward.
Yes, that's the basic structure we learn early on. Subject, verb, object.
Exactly. But in German, the verb can move around quite a lot depending on the sentence. For instance, in a simple statement like Ich esse Äpfel, which means I eat apples, the verb esse, eat, is in the second position, just like in English. But if you add other elements, things change.
Ah, I see. So it's not always as rigid as in English. Can you give us an example?
Certainly. Let's take a sentence with a subordinate clause, a clause that depends on the main clause. In English, we might say, I know that you are tired. Here, the subordinate clause, that you are tired, has the verb are in the usual second position within that clause.
Right. That you are tired. Subject you, verb are.
Correct. Now, in German, if you have a similar sentence, Ich weiß, dass du müde bist, the verb bist, are, moves to the very end of the subordinate clause. So it becomes Ich weiß, dass du müde bist. The verb is last.
Oh, that's a significant difference. So, in German subordinate clauses, the verb goes to the end. That must be confusing for German speakers learning English, as they might instinctively put the verb at the end of clauses.
Absolutely. They might say something like, I know that you tired are. This is a very common mistake. They are applying the German rule to English.
That makes perfect sense. So, for our listeners, remember, in English subordinate clauses, the verb usually stays in its normal position after the subject. I know that you are tired.
Exactly. Another area where word order differs is with modal verbs and perfect tenses. In English, we have I can swim or I have eaten. The modal verb can or the auxiliary verb have comes before the main verb.
Yes, can swim. Have eaten. The auxiliary or modal verb is right before the verb it modifies.
In German, when you have a modal verb in a sentence, the modal verb goes to the end, and the main verb also goes to the end, usually in its infinitive form. So, Ich kann schwimmen literally translates to I can swim, but the structure is more like I can swim. The modal verb can is at the end, and the main verb schwimmen, swim, is also at the end.
So, I can swim in German is structured like I swim can? That's very different.
It is. And for perfect tenses like I have eaten, the auxiliary verb haben, have, goes to the end, and the past participle gegessen, eaten, also goes to the end. So, ich habe gegessen. It's like I have eaten.
So, in both cases with modal verbs and perfect tenses, the verbs are pushed to the end of the sentence in German. This is a big one.
It is. And again, German speakers learning English might struggle with this. They might say, I swim can, or I eaten have.
So, for our listeners, if you're learning German, pay attention to those verb positions. And if you're a German speaker learning English, really focus on keeping your auxiliary and modal verbs right before the main verb. I can swim, not I swim can. I have eaten, not I eaten have.
Precisely. Another point of divergence is the placement of adverbs. In English, adverbs can often move around more freely, but there are common positions. For example, I quickly ate my lunch. The adverb quickly is before the verb. Or, I ate my lunch quickly. The adverb is after the object.
Yes, we often put them before the main verb or at the end of the sentence.
In German, adverbs often take a specific order, and they can also influence verb position. But for simplicity, let's focus on a common pattern. In German, when you have multiple adverbs or adverbial phrases, there's often a preferred order, and sometimes the verb has to move to accommodate them. However, a simpler difference to highlight for learners is the use of prepositions.
Prepositions can be tricky in any language. What's a common issue regarding prepositions and sentence structure between English and German?
Well, in English, we often use prepositions to show relationships of time, place, and direction. For instance, I am going to the park. To indicates direction. I am at home. At indicates location.
Yes, those are essential.
In German, there are similar prepositions, but sometimes the case system of German affects which preposition is used or how it's used. However, a more direct structural difference related to sentence construction is how questions are formed.
Ah, questions. That's a big topic. How do they differ?
In English, for yes/no questions, we typically invert the subject and the auxiliary verb or the verb to be. So you are happy becomes are you happy, or you can swim becomes can you swim?
Right, we add do or does if there's no auxiliary verb. You like pizza becomes do you like pizza?
Exactly. In German, for yes/no questions, you simply move the verb to the beginning of the sentence. So, du bist glücklich, you are happy, becomes bist du glücklich, are you happy? And du kannst schwimmen, you can swim, becomes kannst du schwimmen? Can you swim?
So, the verb goes to the very front for yes/no questions in German. That's a clear difference.
It is. And this can lead to German speakers sometimes forgetting to invert the subject and verb in English or placing the verb incorrectly. They might say, you are happy, instead of, are you happy?
That's a very natural mistake to make if you're used to putting the verb at the beginning. So, for English learners, remember, for yes/no questions, either use do/does or invert the subject and the auxiliary/be verb.
Precisely. Now let's consider information questions, the Woeit questions. In English, we start with the question word, like who, what, where, and then we follow with the inverted subject-verb structure. Where are you going?
Yes. Where plus auxiliary verb plus subject plus main verb.
In German, it's similar in that the question word comes first, but the verb then immediately follows the question word and the subject comes after the verb. So, wo bist du? Where are you? The question word, wo, where, then the verb bist, are, then the subject du, you.
So, where are you in German is where you are in terms of word order. That's another significant shift.
It is, and this can cause confusion because English speakers might naturally say where you are going, which is incorrect. They need to remember the inversion after the question word.
So, for our listeners, English information questions, question word, then auxiliary slash be verb, then subject, then main verb. What are you doing? And for German speakers learning English, remember that inversion after the question word.
Right. Let's touch on another interesting point, the use of articles and determiners. While not strictly sentence structure, it influences how sentences are built and can be a point of confusion.
Yes, articles like a, an, and the can be challenging.
In German, there are definite articles, der, die, das, and indefinite articles, ein, eine. But they change their form depending on the gender, number, and case of the noun they modify. This is quite different from English, where the is always the, and a slash an are used regardless of noun gender.
So the German system is more complex in terms of agreement. How does this affect sentence construction in a way that learners might notice?
It means that German speakers learning English might sometimes omit articles where they are needed or use them incorrectly because they are not accustomed to the simpler but still rule-based English system. For example, they might say, I go to cinema instead of I go to the cinema.
Ah, the definite article the is often missed there. So it's about remembering to use articles consistently in English.
Yes, and conversely, English speakers learning German often struggle with remembering which article to use and how it changes. But focusing back on sentence structure, let's think about sentence connectors.
Connectors like and, but, so, because.
Yes, in English, we can often join clauses relatively freely. I wanted to go to the party, but it was raining. Or, she was tired, so she went to bed.
These are common conjunctions.
In German, when you use certain conjunctions, particularly subordinating conjunctions like weil, because, or das, that, they trigger that verb final position in the subordinate clause we discussed earlier. So, ich bin müde, weil ich spät aufgestanden bin. I am tired because I got up late. Notice bin, got, at the end of the weil clause.
That brings us back to the verb final rule for subordinate clauses. So the conjunctions themselves can signal a structural change.
Exactly. And in English, conjunctions don't typically force such a dramatic change in word order. The verb usually stays in its standard position.
This is a really important distinction. So if you're using because in English, the sentence structure after because will be the same as any other main clause. I am happy because I have a new book. Subject I, verb have.
Correct. Now let's consider another aspect, the use of prepositions with verbs. In English, we have phrasal verbs like look up, turn off, give in. The preposition or particle can change the meaning of the verb.
Yes, phrasal verbs are notoriously difficult for learners.
And their position can sometimes vary. For example, please turn off the light. The particle off is after the verb. Or if the object is a pronoun, please turn it off. The particle comes after the pronoun.
Right. Turn off the light, but turn it off.
In German, they have similar compound verbs, but they often behave differently. Some are separable, meaning the prefix detaches and goes to the end of the sentence in certain contexts, much like the particles in English phrasal verbs. For example, ich stehe 7 Uhr auf. I get up at 7 o'clock. Aufstehen, to get up, is a separable verb, and auf goes to the end.
So the structure can be similar in that a part of the verb moves to the end.
Yes, but the rules for when they separate and the specific meanings are distinct. And for learners, understanding the nuances of English phrasal verbs and their placement is crucial.
It sounds like a common theme is that German speakers might find English word order too fixed, and English speakers might find German word order too flexible or confusing with its rules for verb placement.
That's a very good summary, James. The rigidity of English sentence structure, particularly the subject-verb-object order, is often a relief for learners from languages with more flexible word order. However, they need to be mindful of the exceptions and specific rules, like those in subordinate clauses or questions.
And for German speakers, the challenge is to embrace that fixed order in English and not try to apply German's more dynamic verb placement.
Exactly. Let's think about a final practical tip. When you are listening to English, really pay attention to where the verbs are placed. Try to mimic that. When you are speaking, consciously think subject, verb, object.
That's excellent advice. And for German speakers, when you hear a question, notice if the verb comes before the subject. Is he here? Not he is here?
Yes, that's a great way to internalize the difference. And for German learners of English, when you encounter a subordinate clause starting with that, because, if, or when, remember the verb stays in its normal position. I think that she is nice.
So, to recap, the key differences we've discussed are 1. Verb position in subordinate clauses. In English, verbs stay in their usual place. In German, they go to the end. 2. Verb position with modal and auxiliary verbs. In English, they precede the main verb. In German, both often go to the end. 3. Question formation. English uses inversion or do/does. German moves the verb to the beginning for yes/no questions and places the subject after the verb in information questions. 4. Adverb placement. While flexible in English, German has more specific rules and can affect verb position. 5. Prepositions and articles. German has a more complex system of agreement, which can lead to omissions or incorrect usage in English. 6. Connectors. Certain German conjunctions trigger verb final clauses, unlike in English. 7. Phrasal verbs. English has unique phrasal verbs with flexible particle placement, which differ from German compound verbs.
That's a comprehensive summary, James. It highlights the main areas where learners, particularly those whose native language is German, might encounter difficulties when learning English sentence structure. The core message is to be aware of these differences and to practice actively, focusing on the specific rules of English.
And for our listeners who are not German speakers, understanding these differences can still be very beneficial. It helps you appreciate the nuances of your own language and provides insight into the challenges faced by learners from different linguistic backgrounds. It also reinforces the importance of clear and consistent sentence structure in English.
Absolutely. Language learning is about understanding patterns and applying them correctly. While German and English share Germanic roots, their sentence structures have evolved quite differently in many respects.
Allison, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I think our listeners will find this very helpful.
It was my pleasure, James. I hope it helps many learners feel more confident about English sentence structure.
And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in to ESL Easy English. We hope you found this discussion on English and German sentence structure useful. If you did, please like and subscribe, and join us next time for more tips and insights to make your English journey easier. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone, and see you next time.